regard to the Cydonia project, that was always an interest to me because I never thought there was a face on Mars. It was big. It was like 3 kilometers from corner to corner. So it's like, who would do that facing upwards? I mean, that's a lot of work to do something like that. So I sort of raised my eyebrows and said, well, I don't know about that. Then the better photographs came in, and NASA, which has a clear interest in dampening down discussion, public open discussion about extraterrestrial content, NASA published a lot of stuff saying, see, look at these new photographs. It's not a face. See, it told you so. And the mainstream media, which was essentially ignoring the face idea, chimed in immediately. So whenever officialdom says something, the mainstream media is very quick to repeat it. Whenever somebody else comes up and says something that's opposite what the mainstream media or the officialdom is saying, the mainstream media sort of just ignores that. So, but the idea of it not being a face was really well publicized with these new photographs. And I looked at the new photographs, which were really high resolution, really nice, and I just chuckled over the whole thing because I wasn't even looking for a face. I mean, I thought the whole idea of a face was preposterous in the first place, just because who would do such a thing? But I saw in the photograph absolutely unambiguous, clear, parallel and perpendicular lines, a perimeter around this thing, and a semicircle on the other end that was totally unnatural. I mean, nature with erosion processes simply does not make perfectly parallel and perpendicular lines as a perimeter around something and then a semicircle on the other side. It just never, ever, ever happens. And so I said, this is like a magician's show where the magician distracts you by having something going on the left while he or she is doing something on the right. So this whole talk about the face was really distracting to everybody because if they said, okay, it's not a face, then they weren't seeing it. So easy to distract people. They weren't seeing what was right in front of their own faces, which was clear evidence of artificiality, at least on the surface level. So back in the old days, I always had it in my mind, hey, I'm going to investigate that one day if I ever get a chance. And as the chief investigator for many projects at the Farsight Institute, I was able to send these remote viewers. We work with the absolute best remote viewers on the planet. These are like scary good remote viewers. Dick Algeier, who's out in Hawaii, he studied the HRVG method, came out of Special Forces Intelligence with Glenn Wheaton out in Hawaii, and then Daz Smith, who's British, he's out in Bath, and he works with CRV, Controlled Remote Viewing, which is a method that came out of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So 2 different methodologies, 2 different viewers, opposite ends of the planet, totally blind. They were never told anything about what the nature of the project was. They were just given a non-leading email from me saying, we have a new project, we have a target, remote view it, do it. So what we did was we sent the viewers in it for 2 different time points, and then they went in and described everything. They found structures buried underneath the surface, saying these are hard for people to see. These are sort of embedded, tremendously weathered, something very ancient in the past is here. And then they went back in time to the point when the Cydonia stuff was in maximum use, when it's in its prime condition, and saw what was going on there. And that's when we saw what the Martians looked like, what they were doing. They were just like us, Greg. Literally, they looked like us. They acted like us. The reviewers went into their religious issues, how they had charismatic leaders. That place that's in Cydonia is an elevated place, and in fact, it was surrounded by an ocean. And NASA now completely acknowledges there was huge oceans all over Mars. And that's actually a recent thing. Just a couple of weeks ago, they finally confessed that, which was that the oceans were, covering basically about half the planet, and that they lasted for millions and millions of years. It wasn't just like, in the past, NASA was saying, yeah, it looks like there was some water there, and it might have been around for a few thousand years before it evaporated off. So now they're saying that the planets were huge, they covered a huge swath of area on Mars, and that they lasted for, perhaps hundreds of millions of years, and that's in the so-called habitable zone. So that's melted water, warm, go bathing, go swimming, that type of thing, for millions, hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. So they're slowly introducing the ideas to the public. Now NASA knows full well what's there. They know that there was a civilization there, the whole thing. But the acknowledgement that there was life on Mars and it was intelligent life on Mars, that has never been a scientific decision to make on whether to talk about it publicly. Everyone always says we have to wait for scientists to discover this. They're living in a Disney world. That's a dreamland world. It's never, ever from the very beginning been a scientific issue. It's a political issue. The best way to understand what was on Mars is to think of us. The Martians looked like us. I like to think of them not as Martians over there, but us when we were there. So they looked like us, they acted like us, they were led by charismatic leaders just by us. What was at Cydonia? It was like an island city. It was surrounded by water, surrounded by an ocean, and it had a perimeter around it, and the perimeter, probably, just like walls that you would normally have, surrounding something that was surrounded by water. I mean, you need sort of walls to protect it from waves and other things. And so it was a city that had lots of people on it. They had buildings that were humongous and really, really nice. And they had other areas that would just look like rundown areas in the local area downtown that looks like it was just, where relatively poor people live. Some extraterrestrials clearly have the capability of unambiguously noticing when a remote viewer pops in, but these Martians did not. So they're very human in that sense. And these Martians were in this location, in a city that would be very much at home on Earth. And what basically happened is they had tunnel systems that were extremely advanced. Not that much difference than some of our very advanced subway systems that we have today. So I wouldn't compare it with the subway system in New York. And both Dick and Daz described the underground elements and parts of that Cydonia complex very well. They both described these, passageways going down, the tunnels and so on. Dick gave a long description of the nature of the tunnels. They were really high tech. Now, this idea of tunnels on Mars has been around a long while, and there's actually good pictures of these tunnels as they surfaced, when erosion processes basically, revealed them. But Dick Algar goes into the tunnels and describes them. And then he describes the condition of the tunnels in the current time. And he's really clear about saying, wow, these are much different than the way they were in the past. And he clearly describes and draws really nice pictures of how they were then and how they are today. And he said something like, imagine the New York subway system 10,000 years into the future after the end of civilization, whatever, humanity's gone, and total decay and everything. That's what it looks like now. So that's what the subway system looks like now. It's still there on Mars, but, there are no trains running, and it's in total decay, and it's collapsing, but it's there. The holes, the tunnels are still existing. You can still walk through them. And it would make sense if Cydonia was a major population center back in those days. It would make sense that the tunnels would, in fact, connect it with other places on Mars. So that's what did happen. And then we covered a little bit more about what happened at the very end. And we do know what happened. We've had a number of studies dealing with that realm of the solar system. And it was Dick clearly describes that this thing didn't end with a whimper. It ended with a bang. There was a sudden cataclysmic event that ended up producing like tidal waves, and there was an inundation of the tunnels. That's how Cydonia ended being Cydonia. It was basically washed away. On Mars, if you look at planetary data, one half of Mars is totally covered with huge impact craters. The other half of Mars has nothing. It's flat. So something exploded near Mars that pelted it like a shotgun, and the other half was unscathed. Now, the side of Mars that has craters on it is about a kilometer thicker. The crust is about a kilometer, sometimes up to 3 kilometers thicker than the other side of Mars. So whatever happened exploded near Mars and pelted it with a lot of stuff and basically laid a lot of debris down. Well, that was the beginning of the end. Now, we did another project, the Farsight Institute, and that's available. You can see it for free right on the website. That project was the origin of the asteroid belt. And what we were doing was we were comparing two hypotheses. One was the mainstream science accepted hypothesis that has absolutely no data to support it. But nonetheless, it's what mainstream scientists tells you at universities, is that it was at the solar nebula hypothesis, which is the asteroid belt is constructed from junk that was left over from the primordial solar nebula. Now, the alternate hypothesis, which was actually, it was the very first reason that was ever given for the origin of the asteroid belt, but was quickly dropped, but it was heavily supported with a huge amount of planetary data by Thomas van Flandern, who was a very mainstream astronomer with a huge publication list, and he was the head of the Department of Celestial Mechanics at the Naval Observatory. And he assembled a huge quantity, and I mean huge quantity of data that supported the understanding that there was a planet there before the asteroid belt, and it exploded for reasons that he said was unknown. So that planet was there, and that's how the asteroid belt actually happened. Now, I don't have time to go into sort of the planetary data, but just to briefly summarize, all the asteroids, they show evidence of extreme heat, about melting and stuff like that. And that wouldn't happen with the solar nebula hypothesis. Also, they're solid rock. They're big rock, like Ceres and so on. I mean, they're like really big rock. And for rock to form, you need a gravity source to compress it. You need a big gravity source to bring all that dust and material in. So you really can't get big asteroids from a solar nebula hypothesis. So anyway, that plus a ton of other data that I'm not going to describe now really support the idea that seems improbable from people who don't want to think about exploding planets. But there was a planet there, and it did explode. There's a variety of different hypotheses about how it could have happened. It could have even been an act of war. That'd be easy to do. If you had a underground bunker, deeply buried, housing a few hundred, doomsday-type nuclear weapons, and you had an enemy that wanted to knock out that bunker and shot a bunker busting bomb into it and blew it up and ignited those things would blow up the planet. So whatever happened blew up the planet. And it looks like Mars was nearby. Now, there is one theory that Mars may have been a moon of that planet. And whatever happened, Mars was apparently very close to it. And when the thing blew, it was a bad day on Mars. And that was the end of the Cydonia thing. Now, apparently that was not the end of life on Mars. You'd think that a planet exploding nearby would finish off life. But life has a way, just like Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park, life has a way, life finds a way. Societies survived and built itself back. Now, if you look at human society, go back, we often think that we started 3,000 years ago. That's what mainstream science tells you at universities. Well, we now know that that's nuts, but nonetheless, we were pretty primitive 3,000 years ago. But what it looks like now is that we have a society that goes in cycles, that the planet is severely disrupted every 15, 20,000 years or so. Because it is a ball of liquid rock, any burp that the sun gives in our direction is going to shake it a bit, and that will cause tremendous problems on the surface. And that will basically, crumble civilization as we know it. And we have a situation where where our civilization looks like it started like 3,000 years ago, to the point where a lot of people in mainstream science say, yeah, for sure, we started 3,000 years ago. And we built ourselves up to a technologically sophisticated society in less than 3,000 years. I mean, so this is pretty fast. So in Mars, you basically had the same thing. You had the building up of a society in a relatively, whatever length of time, and they rebuilt themselves. Now, it wasn't like the glory days of the past, but they rebuilt themselves. Why do we know this? Because It's very clear and not in dispute among people who have access to the data that there was a thermonuclear explosion on the surface of Mars. We actually know the area it happened, where it happened. We know the antipode for that and the evidence there. But we know it because of nuclear forensics. It's absolutely unambiguous that there's radiation traces on the surface of Mars that could only come from a nuclear bomb, from a nuclear reaction, an explosive nuclear reaction. And, you know, like with nuclear forensics, there's certain things that can only come from certain types of phenomena. And one of those things that they clearly show in the isotope readings on Mars is there was a nuclear detonation. So they know a lot about that. There's a book out by John Brandenburg, who's a PhD guy, physicist type guy, and he actually has talked about that in a couple books. It's really for those people who know about this information and have access to the actual data. It's without doubt that there was a nuclear detonation on Mars. So they built their civilization back, and the nuclear detonation was the final straw that broke the camel's back. The nuclear detonation blew the last elements of the atmosphere off, because Mars is not a really great place in terms of a gravity well. It doesn't really hold on to things very easily. It's a smaller planet. So the bad day that they had with the exploding planet nearby was one thing. Building themselves back was admirable, but the nuclear detonation finished them off. That's when Mars became what we see now, an uninhabitable planet that is, you know, just got a lot of ruins on it. So, and one day we'll see, hopefully it'll be in the near future, we won't have to wait for 100 years or so, that eventually the political decision will be made to let scientists talk about what they know, and it'll be really interesting to see the discussions that are happening on Earth. We actually really need to know about what happened in Mars and the Cydonia region, because we need to learn from the mistakes that the Martians did so that we don't repeat those same mistakes and follow their path down the path to hell.